Hi, my name is Brian Caffo. I'm in the Department of Biostatistics at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. And this is the second lecture on Shiny, which I'm calling Shinier, from the Coursera Data Science specialization in the Data Products class. The whole series, and as well as this class, is co-taught by my good friends Jeff Leake and Roger Pang. Okay. So last time we covered very basic Shiny, just how do you set up a UI, how do you set up the server, and how do you get a very basic interactive web page built in R. And if you're like most people, you found the building the user interface pretty trivial, but had a hard time with the server.r part and interacting with it because Shiny behaves very differently than an ordinary R session. So what we're just going to do is cover some more of the details of Shiny, and since the writing of that first lecture, a more detailed tutorial has come out, and it's really great, so I would just go check that out as well. Okay. So let's just first start talking about what server.r is doing. So if you put some code before the Shiny server function in the server.r file, that just gets called once when you do run app. Code inside the unnamed function right here in the Shiny server statement, that gets executed every time there's a page refresh or a new user hits the website. Okay, so this stuff, the stuff that's executed before the Shiny server function, gets executed once run app is called. And the rest gets executed every single time there's a page refresh or a new user. And then reactive code are codes that are inside the render statements, for example, render plot or render text statements in the Shiny server statement, and those get run repeatedly as needed when new values are entered into the widgets from UI.R. Okay, so let's just go through some experimental code. I'll look at the code here, and then I'll call up this app in just a second. All of this code is on the GitHub repository. So we're going to do a page with sidebar. This is the UI. I just put hello Shiny there because that was in the tutorial, and I don't know why I keep doing it. So I'm just going to have two things, text input 1 and text input 2. So I'm going to have two text input boxes, and then here I'm going to output a bunch of text, and you'll see what my goal is in the outputting the text. Notice the input text labels. The input text labels are text 1 and text 2, and it looks oh, I'm sorry, that's the input IDs are text 1 and text 2. The labels is this is just the text that it's going to put in the text box that you type into, and the output is maybe confusingly labeled text 1, text 2, text 3, text 4, and text 5. Okay, let's look at what server is doing. Okay, so here's what I'm doing. I'm using the double arrow sign just to make sure that everything is assigned outside of all environments and globally assigned. Probably that's not necessary for these things that are outside of the Shiny server function, but maybe might be necessary inside here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable x, and I'm going to increment it +1. So I'm going to define x in R before I run app, and then I'm going to set this variable y to be 0, and then inside the Shiny server function I'm going to increment it once. So here in output text 4 I'm going to render y, in output text 5 I'm going to render x, in output text 1 I'm just going to render what got input in the text 1 input box, in output text2, I'm going to render what got input in the text2 input box. And output text3, I'm going to take text1 and I'm going to add 1. Okay, so let's try this. Okay, so here I have my server.r code, and let me just type run app. There's a thing called display mode, but let me just run it normally right now. Okay, and here it is. Okay, so you can see it says hello shiny. Okay, and in output text1 we haven't input anything, so that value is still null, so when it prints it out it's printing out nothing. Output text2, we haven't input anything, so that's still null. Output text3, it's trying to add 1 to a value of null, so that returns an NA. Okay, and I've set x to 0 and then added 1 to it, and so now it's 1, and y, which was set to 0 inside the function and is now set as 1. Let's see what happens when we refresh. Okay, sorry, this was y. So now notice y is incremented to 2, but x is still incremented to 1. Okay, and actually if I wanted to do this, let me do this correctly. I'm going to stop that. I'm going to stop running the app. I want to set x to 0 in the environment here. There we go. Okay, so here you can see now x is 1 because it's incremented it once at the start of the run app statement. Okay, and y, here's x right here, and here's y right here. Okay, let's refresh. See, now y is 2 because it's executing this statement every single time there's a page refresh or a new user. Okay, now let's input some text. Let's input x, the first text1, let's input as 2. Now notice it's 2, and then here it's at 3 because this text is x, the text1 input plus 1. Okay, now let's try inputting 5 for this guy. Okay, now it's 5. Now notice what happens if I change text2 to 6, right? Notice it updated this, but it didn't do anything to that. It waits until I update it, and then it does. So Shiny only executes what's needed, only the component of the code that's needed. And so the biggest mistake you can make in a Shiny app is to think of the Shiny function as something where the code just runs through it serially. These reactive text statements, these reactive code statements are reacting to the widget input and in a manner that doesn't necessarily rerun this text, right? It doesn't necessarily rerun this one when you input a new value for this one. Okay. Okay, so that was our first example. Let's move on to another example. Well, actually, now that I look at the notes, let's just discuss it. Okay, so when you type run app, hitting refresh increments y, but entering values in the text box does not increment y. You have to do a page refresh, or a new user would have to connect. X is always 1 because that only gets executed once at the start of server.r. And then watch how text1 and text2 are updated as needed, and it doesn't add 1 to text1 every time a new text2 is input. Important to do this, I think, try run app and then display.mode equals showcase. That's very useful for seeing what Shiny is actually executing at the time that it's executing it. Okay. So sometimes, reactive expressions, so the render statement, I'll delete that one, is unnecessary there. The render statement is these render plot, render text, etc. Those are reactive statements. They react to widget input, and so on. Sometimes in your code you want to have reactive code, but you don't actually want it to be part of a render statement for a variety of reasons. For example, you might want some code that gets reused in several render statements, and you don't want to redo the calculations for each, or you want your code to be neater, or there's a variety of reasons why you want this. So there's a function called reactive that's just made for this purpose. Okay, so I think it's easiest to explain this in just an example. So here's the second example. So here I have the same, basically the same UI.R function. But imagine now I want to take my text input and add 100 to it. But I only want to do that once. I want to, I want to add 100 to it, and I want to display it twice, right? So here in this first output, I'm going to display my input incremented by 100, and then in the second one, I'm going to display my input incremented by 100 plus whatever number I put into text 2. Okay, so obviously this doesn't change the runtime that much, but now we only have to increment it by 100 once, rather than doing it twice, once in each reactive render text statement. Okay, so at any rate, you might have thought, oh well, if I just put input asterisk text1 plus 100 outside of this reactive statement, what would happen? Shiny would give you an error because you're trying to utilize reactive input outside of a reactive function or a render text function or something like that is reactive. Okay, so it's a little bit unusual, and if you're not used to it, and you're used to R, it's a little hard to get used to. Okay, so and this just is as opposed to what would give you the same exact functionality is to just add 100 in both render text statements. But of course then you're doing this calculation twice, and of course this calculation doesn't take any time, so it's irrelevant, but you see the principle. So and then we're going to do run app and display mode equals showcase, and again, while inconsequential, that we only have to add 100 one time rather than adding it twice. And then, it just would also say, notice the somewhat odd syntax for reactive variables. So notice here, when we actually want the values of x, which was defined as reactive output, we actually have to call it as an executed function with these parentheses, which is a little bit unusual relative to normal R programming. Okay. Okay, so here is my example. I've already started running the app. Here's my Shiny server function right here. Okay, and notice this case I've put the X function, added the 100 in the reactive statement, and it's running. And notice I've run display mode equals showcase. Okay, so right here. Okay, and then now notice so here you can see what code it's running. So if I put in x equals 100, right now it has output text1 equals 200, output text2 is NA because we haven't input anything. Now when I put in 100 there, it highlights, notice in the display mode it highlights what it's doing. You can check on UI.R also and see what it's running. Okay? And so you see, and just to prove to you that it does the same thing, let's, what's the keyboard shortcut for commenting? Let's see, comment, uncomment is Control-Shift-C. All right, so let's do Control-Shift-C, and then come down here, Control-Shift-C. Okay, save it, stop. Now let's run the app, and we'll just show you that it does exactly the same thing. When you see, it gives the same exact output. It works just like before, but now instead it's adding 100 separately each time in the separate render.txt statement. In some cases, you may want your reactive code to not be so reactive, which I know sounds ludicrous, but let me explain. Basically, sometimes you don't want Shiny to immediately perform reactive calculations from widget inputs. So notice in all my previous examples, when I inputted text, it immediately did the calculations as soon as it got the chance to. However, often your calculations are expansive and you simply don't want the reactivity to occur immediately. You want the user to input them, think about them, and make sure they got it set right, and then push go or something like that. So in other words, you want something like a submit button, something, and it's very simple to do this. Let's see, so here I'm still doing a page with a sidebar. Hello shiny is my header I keep putting in it. So here I have text1 is my input for text1, text2 is my text2 input, and then I'm going to put an action button called go button. So the label is go button, and the input ID is go button, and the label above the button will be go exclamation point. And then the main panel, you'll see it's just outputting text1, text2, text3. Okay? And then my server.r, in my server.r function, here I'm just going to output text1, I'm going to output text2, and then in the text3, I'm going to make the execution of that reactive code dependent on the go button, okay? And so I'm going to, sort of create this dependency on the go button right here, and then this isolate statement will isolate doing that statement until the button is pressed, okay? So let's try it. Okay, now I'm going to hit A and B just like before. Notice when I change A to C, it changes there. When I change B to D, it changes there. And when I hit go, it displays both of them, C and D, right? I could change this to E, F, I could write in data products here, right? Oops, I want it up here. I want data products up there, and then is cool, are cool, are cool. Okay, and it doesn't, notice it says, data products there and is are cool there, but it won't concatenate it into the sentence until you press the button go. Okay. And let's see, so I have another example here, I tried to just discuss what we saw. It doesn't display text3 until the go button is pressed. The variable input go button, it gets incremented every single time you press the button. So you can actually use that to create conditional statements, sort of like if go button equals 1, then you could say you've pressed the button once. So here's I replaced the code in that other example where I said if go button equals 0, then you've pressed the button, as if go button equals 1, you've pressed it once, and then else, okay, quit pressing it. Okay. Okay, so you can see the code over here, and then now let's look over here and input some text. Okay, so I'm going to put just A, B, and B there, and notice it reactively displays the text. It says you have not pressed the button. I pressed the button once, you pressed it once. Okay, quit pressing it. Okay, so that's how you can build condition on the number of button presses statements into your reactive code. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit more about layouts. The sidebar layout that we've been showing is for sure the easiest. And then there's a more general layout, of which the sidebar layout is created via it's a fluid page. It's a much more flexible style to use, and it's basically just accessing the Twitter Bootstrap styles. And you can go to this link right here and see a bunch of examples and just tinker with the examples. So for example, in your fluid page statement, you can have fluid row statements, can create rows, and then the column function creates columns, and you can just see in there how you can use R to create the layout. And you can have things like tab sets, nav list, and nav bars for more complicated apps, and they're relatively easy to create. If you want to directly use the HTML, for a really complicated layout, you want to do that. Plus, to be honest, if you know web development well, which I really don't, but if you really know web development well, then working with R to develop the layout is probably kind of annoying to you. So if you're familiar with R and don't know web development very very well, then this is probably perfect. But if you happen to know web development quite well, then probably this is excruciating. So just create a directory called www in the same directory with server.r. So the directory www exists in the same directory as server.r. Server.r does not exist inside the www directory. Okay, and then have an index.html page in that www directory. Okay, so the page layout is in this directory. The server exists at the same root directory that this www directory exists in. Okay, hopefully I've beat that to death. Okay, and then your named input variables will be passed to server.r. So if you have an input of some type, this is just a numeric text box number, name here equals n, so input $n can be used in your server.r reactive statements. And your server.r will have class definitions of the form shiny something. When you want to display reactive output in your HTML, you need, for example, to call, to say the class statement, and that's it. Then you can. The examples are up here at this link, and you could do it more thoroughly there. But I just want to make sure it's really very easy. If you know a little bit of web development, it's trivial. If you can get a Shiny app running, and you know web development, then being able to do this should be no problem. So some debugging tools. Let's talk about debugging tools. Debugging Shiny apps is kind of annoying because it's sort of not a core part of R. It's sort of built on top of R, so it's a little. So I actually find this display mode equals showcase incredibly useful. And you can use the cat, which is just like the C function cat, the C programming language function cat, or anyway, it just displays text standard out. So the R console in this case, usually, if you're running run app from the R console. And then the browser function will interrupt execution, and so you can call the browser function conditionally. And anyway, Shiny has a whole article on debugging Shiny apps, and these are easily the only 3 ones that I would ever use. Mostly I use the cat function to display the status of code inside the app. That's what I find more useful than anything else. And that's it. So hopefully you're up and running now with creating Shiny applications, and I'm confident what you'll find is that you can go from R code to a web product very, very quickly, which is what we want people to be able to do. And we're excited for people to start putting out their own web apps and see what they create.